Welcome to a new episode of Pinal's People. We're joining you from the Pinal County Precinct Justice Court in Casa, Grande, and with us today is former and newly retired Justice of the Peace, John Ellsworth. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to get started, I usually ask all of our guests this, but could you share a little bit about your background and sort of, how you came to be Justice of the Peace for our audience members who might not be familiar with you?
Sure. I grew up in Chandler. When I was 17 years old, I went in the United States Air Force. And when I went in the Air Force, I was a military police officer, law enforcement specialist, and that kind of gave me the foundation for my future successes in life. Matter of fact, I attribute a lot of my successes to the Air Force. That's where I met my wife, Terry. We've been together for since 1975. And anyway, let me back up. So I went in the Air Force as a law enforcement specialist, and when I got out, I flooded the market. Applied to Phoenix PD, Chandler, Casa Grande was one of the places that I applied, and they asked me, "You on your application it says that you've got ongoing with Mesa PD. If we hire you and the Mesa PD calls down, will you leave and go up there?" And I said, "No. Whoever hires me first, I'll give them 20 years." And I did. And so I got hired on with the Casa Grande Police Department, and I retired as a sergeant. And then went to work for the Department of Corrections as a criminal investigator, investigating crimes within the prison system. After 9/11, I really thought at that time that my services might be better back out on the streets, back out in the public. I was still young enough to do it. And so I applied to the Pinal County Sheriff's Office and then worked there till 2014 and retired as a lieutenant, the operations commander over the Criminal Investigations Bureau. And I was blessed to be elected as the judge here in town. And I also had two more elections that they chose me to represent them as their judge.
That's incredible. And so, as we were talking a little bit off camera about, you ran for election for the Justice of the Peace position back in 2014. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I would love to know, if you could if we were to go back in time a little bit, could you share a little bit about what was sort of your first motivation for why you felt you wanted to run for Justice of the Peace?
I'm cautious about saying this, but because I don't want to say anything negative about any previous judges. But when you're in law enforcement, you kind of understand, and you understand how different courts are running. I just thought that the court could run more efficient, and so that's what caused me to. Plus, I knew it was time to get out of law enforcement. That's a young person's game. Mm-hmm. So it was. I did 36 years as a certified Arizona peace officer before I retired and ran for judge. That was enough time for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one other thing I wanted to ask you about as well is, so of course, JP is an interesting position because many different, you see many different type of cases, of course, like come before you. What do you, what's one thing you wish more people understood about the position of Justice of the Peace?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question correctly, but let me see if this will answer that for you. The Justice of the Peace is as close as you're going to get to the People's Court. Not like the TV show, because we demand in the courtroom dignity, respect, and decorum. We don't allow them to get in arguments back and forth for entertainment purposes. But I believe the Justice of the Peace, we only hear misdemeanors, and then we'll do protective orders and evictions, that sort of thing. Probably the most serious thing we'll face is a DUI jury trial, as far as that goes. But yeah, I just believe that the Justice of the Peace are kind of. I'm sorry. Let me tell you this. I've used this before. I said this on the record. I don't ever call myself an elected official. I didn't do that. I would tell people I was elected to represent this community as their justice of the peace. And I took that very seriously. And I think I was successful, both with my own satisfaction and feedback that I would get, is I dealt with it like I was the elder of the village, and I was trying to keep the peace in that village and keep things from going to the King's Court, i.e. the Superior Court over in Florence. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of I took that into consideration. I had a lot of experience with human behavior, 36 years as a cop. They would be talking about scenarios. I've been there, done that. I rolled on a lot of, especially like a protective order or something. I understood that. I could relate to them. But almost every justice of the peace that I knew in the state over the 10 years that I was a judge and going to conferences, they really cared about the people. And they wanted to make sure they did the right thing. And I've even said this on the record before. I don't ever want to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering if I made a bad decision. And so I would process all the information, and I would have to go by the rules, what the rules are, and the statutes, the laws. And sometimes you got to let that override a gut feeling. Yeah. You got to stay with what the law says. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that answered your question. But.
No, it did. And I think that's a beautiful analogy too. And you mentioned how some of your experiences in law enforcement kind of helped prepare you for that. And that's actually one of the questions I was going to bring up to you. Do you feel, because, as you said, 36 years in law enforcement, that's quite a lengthy career. Could you provide some insight into how you felt that maybe, I wouldn't necessarily say gave you a leg up, but how do you feel that informed your background as justice of the peace and enabled you to make, some of these decisions?
The higher courts throughout the United States, they recognize and they have ruled that a trier of fact, and a judge in a bench trial, are to rely on their life experiences. That as a child, as a husband or a wife, as a dad, as a grandpa, and any work environment that you gain life experiences through, and they recognize that and they want you to have that ability. And I believe that is what's helped so much at this lower level of court, is I can relate. Like I said before, I think I said it before, I've been there, done that. They're talking a scenario, I've been to one of those several times. Mm-hmm. And my previous experience as a homicide detective and the training I went to, is you can read nonverbal communication pretty good, especially with the training. And I don't want to get real technical, but even psycholinguistics on how the language is used, you pay attention to all that. But truly, I could take you and put you in a robe and put you up on the bench, and you're going to appreciate the fact that you see them in person and you're watching how they're reacting to testimony or evidence that's presented. And you have to stay within the rules, but that kind of shines a flashlight down the pathway for you.
Yeah. I
hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I think that's actually really profound. Bear with me just a sec. So just a couple more questions for you, actually. So when you think about, some of the issues that have come before you as justice of the peace, you mentioned before, I think we talked about this, it kind of runs the gamut, but a lot of it's misdemeanors, protective orders, things like that. What do you think, especially on the lower court level, when you look at some of those issues that have been presented to you, what do you think are some of the challenges that face lower courts in Pinal County today? And how can they navigate those?
Well, I need to back up a little bit and explain that justice of the peace in Arizona does not have to be a law-trained attorney. Mm-hmm. I think our forefathers in Arizona, they wrote the Arizona Constitution. I think they had that in mind. The justice of the peace should be somebody from that community, because that is a requirement. You can't live in northern Pinal County and then come down here and run in Casa Grande. They want you to be a member of that, within that precinct, that community. And I believe that they wanted us to, they had the idea that this is more of a people's court. We're not putting people in prison. We're not hearing divorces or child custody or any of that kind of stuff. It's kind of the lower level, like I mentioned before, the village. Let's keep peace in this village.
Mm-hmm.
There's rules for a reason, and let's try and work that way. And again, I may have gotten off topic.
No,
I didn't answer your question. I apologize. You can ask again, and I'll answer it for you. But I hesitate to say this, but I don't mind. I think I'm a pretty honest and upfront person. I think that the JP's not being law trained is actually a benefit at this level of court, because you're more on the dealing with the people, and attorneys are more. I'm just going to say my experience is attorneys are more. This is a rule. This is my banner I'm carrying. I'm going to fight to. And as the judge, not law trained, I think you're listening more to the people and getting a feel of the environment and trying to do what's right instead of thinking about Rule 2.3 or Rule 18.4, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. It does.
There is an awful lot of justice of the peace in Arizona that are prior law enforcement. I think that's been a benefit to the judges, because that experience transitions back in now where you're a trier of fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to tell you this too. This sounds self-serving, but there were witnesses out there. When I was a supervisor in law enforcement, every once in a while I'd see a report come through, and I might call that officer, that deputy in, and say, this is not going to fly. And I have used this line before. We swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, not to try and figure out ways to circumvent it. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to go on this. If they're rolling dirty, they're riding dirty, we're going to catch them again, and we're going to do it right.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, what I'm talking about.
It does make sense. And actually, it gives me another question that I would love to ask you and kind of get your insight on. Is so for people, because of course, we just had a big election season, but in the next couple of years we'll have another one. And I would love to kind of get your perspective on this. Is for people who might be thinking about, I may want to get into the justice of the peace position. What would you say to, of course, encourage anybody, but also, what messages or what things would you like them to keep in mind about what this job requires for people who are in that position, like you said, to listen to other people and hear their stories?
I would tell you, and I would tell anybody, that the job is a lot more difficult and technical and stressful than what it may appear when you're up on that bench and they're coming in and watching your decisions. You have to stay up. The law, a case today heard on the East Coast can have a ripple effect across the entire state. The United States. And so things change based on court rulings, so you have to stay on top of that. And I'm not quite sure. I'm searching for the right words. I'm trying to find the best descriptor for this. Something else that I've said before on the record. When I say on the record, I'm saying this is something you can check on. I've said this on the record. Even though I was in law enforcement for 36 years, I didn't fully understand what the robe signified that a judge wore. Mm-hmm. I just didn't really understand that. I knew it. It goes back to England, except we didn't wear those white wigs.
The wigs, yeah.
Maybe I need a wig. But anyway, until I went to NJO, which is New Judge Orientation. It's the Arizona Supreme Court Judicial College. It's like a police academy, except for judges. Very intense, homework every night, when you go up to things and go through this training course. And during that training course, we were speaking about ethics. One of the instructors said the robe signifies that it's covering up any internal bias that you have or feelings. And I tell people, it's protecting the people in the courtroom from me. Because when you put on that robe and you go in there, okay, I'm going in with an open mind. I'm going to listen to all the evidence, and I'm going to make the proper decision on what the law is.
Mm-hmm.
As a judge, you have some wiggle room on sentencing or making rulings, but there are some hard, fast rules. Can't go beyond this. But the keeping unbiased and wearing that role and remembering that this is a shield to protect the people in the courtroom from you, how you may feel. I spoke earlier about gut feelings.
Mm-hmm.
They have an expression for that. That was a gut feeling ruling. It didn't necessarily run with the rules. It made a lot of sense, a lot of common sense, but it just didn't go within those rules. That can cause you some issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Later on.
That's very fascinating, actually. I really appreciate that. And then one last question for you, John. So, if you were to think, of course, you recently retired, but if you're to think, many, many years down the line, when people look back at your time in law enforcement and they look back at, your time as a judge, we're talking over 10 years. What do you hope they remember most about you and your legacy?
I hope they recall me as being fair but firm, and I really do. I would love to have the legacy that I delegated and I tried to mentor and tried to help other people succeed. I never was one of those supervisors that perceived a sharp employee as a threat. Those are the people you embrace. And it never bothered me. As a matter of fact, I take a certain amount of pride that people that I mentored through law enforcement, maybe I outranked them, that surpassed me later on. And I still get thanked every once in a while on that. But the legacy would be that, like I mentioned before, I don't want to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Did I make the wrong decision? You really want to think it out. That'll segue into an incident that happened more than a few times, but one in particular was this young guy. I stopped into a convenience store here in town. I was working, and he came up to me and said, "Hey, Judge, how are you doing?" Which caused me to kind of get on guard there for a second because I didn't recognize that person. But he wanted to shake my hands and tell me how much, this sounds self-serving, I don't mean it that way, I'm just relating to you, that he appreciated what I did for him, that I finally got his attention and he got into counseling. He's been clean. And I looked at him, I said, "I don't even recognize you now. You look healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Your skin color is good. So congratulations, I appreciate that." That's the kind of thing that'll stay with me. As far as the legacy goes, it may have been firm, but he was very fair.
Yeah.
That's what I hope they would remember me by.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I didn't mind helping out people that were moving up the ladder. Like I said earlier, there was a sense of pride for me that I could start, I'm not going to do it, but I could start naming off people that moved up. And, well, I will mention one, that Judge Reginald Winston, who I was a sergeant at the police department when he got hired, when he applied and did his background and did the oral board. And then after he got out of the academy, he was actually on my squad. And then look where he went. Retired as the deputy chief of police, and just recently got appointed to replace me here at the court. I'm very proud of that there were folks that I could help climb that ladder and reach their goals, and that I had a little bit to do with that.
Yeah, that's incredible. John, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just love this community. Moved here in 1978 when I got hired on. I am so blessed. I've been with my wife, Terry, since 1975. We have 3 adult kids that have given us 6 grandkids, and I'm so blessed because they all live right here in Casa, Grande.
Yeah.
That's a legacy right there.
Yeah,
Right
yeah.
there. Sorry I threw that in there, but I wanted to, that's how much it means to me is the family.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this.